Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the world of ancient warriors. Picture yourself in the heart of a fierce battle, surrounded by the clash of swords, the thundering hooves of horses, and the deadly swish of blades. But here's the twist: you're not making a sound. In fact, you're trained to fight without a single noise escaping your lips or your armor. You probably won't survive this, but tonight, you'll get a glimpse into the fascinating world of the silent Chenbin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I love hearing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ancient Vietnamese battlefield was a symphony of chaos. The clash of weapons, the shouts of warriors, the tumult of war, all these sounds formed the backdrop of any battle. But the Chenbin, those highly trained warriors of ancient Vietnam, mastered something extraordinary. They fought in complete silence. While others panicked, their minds and bodies were attuned to the stillness that could make the difference between life and death. But why silence? Why, in a world where noise was the norm, would silence be so crucial? Historians still debate whether silence was a conscious choice by the Chenbin or simply an inevitable result of their rigorous training. Regardless, silence became a key element in their combat skills, and it wasn't just about being quiet for quiet's sake. This was a tool of war, a way to move with stealth and precision, to outsmart the enemy before the first strike was even made. And it wasn't just a physical skill, it was a mental one. To fight without sound, the Chenbin had to discipline their bodies, control their breathing, and master the art of being present in the moment. No distractions, no noise. As we delve deeper into the world of these silent warriors, remember that the ancient Vietnamese battlefield was a different kind of fight altogether. In a way, the Chenbin's true battle was against himself. He had to become a master of focus and inner peace, moving with an economy of effort that most soldiers never considered. And that silence, it wasn't just about avoiding detection. It was a way of mastering the battlefield itself, a mental edge that set the Chenbin apart from everyone else. You adjust your grip on the hilt of your sword, taking in the eerie stillness around you. The battlefield, usually teeming with noise, now feels strangely calm. This isn't by accident, it's the result of years of training in silence. Silence wasn't just an aesthetic choice or a matter of preference. It was a tactical advantage. It was the kind of secret weapon that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The first step for any Chenbin was to learn to control every muscle, every movement, down to the subtlest shift of weight. Without this control, silence would be impossible. You start to understand that silence in combat wasn't simply about the absence of sound. It was about the precision of movement. The Chenbin would practice for hours on end, not just perfecting their swordplay, but fine-tuning their ability to make minimal noise. Every movement, from the swish of the blade to the tread of their feet, was meticulously trained to avoid creating any unnecessary sound. A warrior's armor, once a source of clanking noise, became an extension of the body, perfectly silent when moved correctly. Historians still argue whether this intense focus on silence was solely due to practical reasons, or if it was also tied to the philosophical and spiritual training the Chenbin underwent. Some suggest that the discipline of silence was inspired by Buddhist monks and their practice of mindfulness. Both were committed to self-control and inner peace. The silent approach to combat was almost meditative, in its own way. A Chenbin needed to train his body to remain in control under any circumstance, particularly in the chaos of battle. With every strike, every step, there was a moment of calm before the storm. This control of the body wasn't just about movement, it was also about reaction. The Chenbin had to learn to fight without being swayed by fear or excitement. If the heart raced, the breath would quicken, and any sound made would alert the enemy. Thus, these warriors trained their minds just as rigorously as their bodies. They learned how to master fear, how to control their reactions in the heat of the moment. Silence became as much about controlling the mind as it was about controlling the body. In this way, the Chenbin's discipline was an inner strength that set him apart from the common soldier. The ability to remain calm and focused under pressure, without the distraction of noise, gave him the edge. Every small movement, every step, was deliberate. The silence on the battlefield was a sign of their precision, their expertise. The training of a Chenbin in the art of silent combat began early and was relentless. Young warriors would spend hours in meditation, learning to quiet their minds before they even picked up a weapon. They would practice moving through dense forests without disturbing a single leaf, their footsteps as light as a feather. This wasn't just physical training, it was a complete rewiring of the warrior's instincts. As you stand on the battlefield, you realize that the silence of the Chenbin wasn't just about not making noise. It was about becoming one with the environment. These warriors could blend into their surroundings so effectively that they seemed to disappear. They used the natural sounds of the battlefield, the rustle of leaves, the distant clash of weapons to mask their movements. In this way, silence became not just the absence of sound, but a strategic use of the sounds around them. The weapons of the Chenbin were also designed with silence in mind. Swords were crafted to cut through the air with minimal resistance, reducing the telltale whistle of a swinging blade. Bows were strung with materials that released arrows with barely a whisper. Even the armor was designed to flex and move without the typical clanking associated with metal plates. Every aspect of their equipment was tailored to maintain the advantage of silence. But perhaps the most powerful weapon in the Chenbin's arsenal was their ability to use silence to unnerve their enemies. In the chaos of battle, the sudden absence of sound could be more terrifying than any war cry. Enemies would find themselves jumping at shadows, their nerves frayed by the eerie quiet that preceded a Chenbin attack. This psychological warfare was just as effective as any physical blow. As our journey through the world of the silent Chenbin comes to an end, we're left with a profound appreciation for these ancient warriors. Their mastery of silence wasn't just a combat technique, it was a philosophy, a way of life. In today's noisy world, perhaps we can learn something from their dedication to stillness and control. So, the next time you find yourself in a chaotic situation, remember the Chenbin. Take a moment to find that inner silence, to move with purpose and precision. Who knows, it might just give you the edge you need. And with that, I'll leave you to ponder in the quiet of your own thoughts. Until next time, stay curious, stay silent, and most importantly, stay safe out there. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of your armor settle around you as you move silently. The air feels thick with the tension of the moment, but there's a strange peace that comes with the quiet. This isn't a silence born out of fear or hesitation, but one of absolute focus. The knights weren't just trained to fight, they were trained to be as silent as ghosts, their movements invisible and precise. But how did they achieve such a level of mastery over their bodies? It all started with their training. Knights didn't just learn to swing swords or ride horses. They learned to move through the world in a way that didn't disturb the air around them. Their footwork was key. Every step was calculated. They trained to place their feet on the ground with as little impact as possible, to glide rather than stomp. Historians still argue whether this kind of training was as common as legends suggest, but records from the time point to this kind of technique being central to a knight's education. The movement was similar to that of a predator stalking its prey, silent, deliberate, and deadly. This was no accident. In battle, making noise was the equivalent of painting a target on your back. A knight's goal was to blend into the environment, to be a shadow, unnoticed and untouchable. Silence didn't just keep the enemy unaware of your position, it allowed you to control the fight from the start. You could assess the battlefield without alerting anyone to your next move. You were always one step ahead, always in control. But it wasn't just about silent footfalls or quiet strikes. It was about understanding the battlefield itself. The knights were taught to read the world around them like a map, learning the sounds of nature, the creak of the wood, the whispers of wind, and the distant shouts of their comrades. They could feel when something was wrong by the very absence of sound. Historians still argue whether this heightened awareness was a learned skill or simply an instinct. But many believe that the best knights had an uncanny ability to read the environment, sensing changes in the soundscape long before anyone else. As you move through the battlefield, silent as the night, you realize the importance of this heightened awareness. The ability to hear the smallest change in the environment gave knights an upper hand. It was like a game of chess. Every move mattered, and silence was your best ally. In this world of quiet warriors, the knight wasn't just a soldier. He was a master of patience, a strategist who relied on stillness to outsmart his opponent. Whether it was in the calm of the training ground or the chaos of battle, the silent knight could always predict what would come next. And that, you think, is the real secret to surviving battle. Knowing the battlefield as well as you know yourself, you continue your journey, moving with ease, your body honed through years of practice. There's a new sense of awareness now, almost as if you're no longer just a part of the battlefield, but its silent observer. Every small detail stands out: the rustle of leaves in the distance, the faintest shift in the air. But how did knights train themselves to pick up on these minute details, especially in the chaos of battle? The answer lies in the way knights were taught to rely on their senses, particularly their hearing. In an age before modern technology, the ability to listen carefully to the world around you could make the difference between life and death. Every sound was a clue, a whisper of what was happening on the battlefield. From the clatter of armor to the sound of enemy footsteps, the knight learned to pick up subtle cues that others might miss. Historians still debate the extent to which knights used their hearing as a tactic, but one thing is clear: a knight who was in tune with the sounds of his environment could gain a tremendous advantage. The ability to listen closely meant that a knight could anticipate attacks, predict enemy movements, and even time his strikes with perfect precision. It was as though each sound played a part in a larger symphony, and the knight was the conductor, able to orchestrate his movements with a sense of perfect timing. This listening ability went beyond just picking up noise. It was about understanding what each sound meant in the context of battle. A knight didn't just hear footsteps. He knew the rhythm and pattern of those footsteps, whether they were approaching or retreating. He didn't just hear the clash of swords. He could discern the intensity of the blows and use that to his advantage, deciding when to strike or when to retreat. But it wasn't all about hearing. Knights also trained their other senses: touch, sight, and even taste. To some extent, they were taught to feel the vibrations of the ground beneath them as they moved, to understand the way their weapons felt in their hands, and to recognize the weight of their armor. They had to become attuned to the way their bodies moved in space, understanding how every shift in balance could affect their silent approach. Historians argue whether the knights' training in these areas was as intense as some suggest, but there's little doubt that their ability to use all of their senses gave them an edge over less trained soldiers. This multisensory approach was a key aspect of silent combat. It allowed knights to remain composed, to fight with precision and confidence, and to move through the battlefield almost unnoticed. And it wasn't just about stealth, it was about strategy. By relying on their senses and staying in tune with the world around them, knights could control the flow of the fight without ever needing to make a sound. As you continue your silent journey through the battlefield, you realize that this heightened awareness isn't just a skill, it's a way of life. It's about being present in every moment, about understanding the world around you in a way that goes beyond mere sight or sound. It's about becoming one with your environment, about moving through the world with a grace and precision that seems almost superhuman. You think about the years of training it took to reach this level of mastery, the countless hours spent in silent meditation, learning to control every breath, every heartbeat, the grueling physical exercises designed to hone your body into a perfect instrument of war, the mental challenges that pushed you to the limits of your endurance, teaching you to remain calm and focused even in the face of overwhelming odds. And now, as you move through the chaos of battle, you understand why all that training was necessary. You can sense the movements of your enemies before they even know you're there. You can feel the shift in the air that signals an incoming attack. You can hear the whisper of a blade being drawn from its sheath, even amidst the din of battle. This, you realize, is what it means to be a true knight. Not just a warrior, but a silent guardian, a protector who moves unseen and unheard, always ready to strike when needed. It's a heavy responsibility, but one that you bear with pride and honor. As the battle rages on around you, you remain calm, centered, aware. You are the eye of the storm, the still point in a world of chaos. And in this moment, you know that no matter what challenges lie ahead, you are ready to face them. Silent, strong, and unafraid. You stand still, your body feeling almost weightless, as the world around you moves in slow motion. The silence is palpable now, enveloping you in a cocoon of calm amidst the chaos. But as much as silence was essential to your survival, it wasn't the only element at play. The monks, those silent figures of the medieval world, played a crucial role in shaping the knight's understanding of silence and focus. In fact, much of what knights knew about control and discipline was borrowed from the monastic life. Monks had long understood the power of silence. Their vows of silence, enforced through long hours of meditation and prayer, were a form of self-discipline that knights adopted in their own training. Historians still argue whether the knight's use of silence was a direct influence from monastic orders, but the similarities are striking. Monks focused on inner peace, on silence as a way to commune with God and master the self. Similarly, knights sought peace through silence, learning to control their thoughts and actions in preparation for battle. In monastic life, silence wasn't merely the absence of noise, it was a tool for mental clarity and focus. The same principle applied to knights. The battlefield was chaotic, but a knight's mind needed to remain calm, focused, and clear. To fight effectively, the knight needed to cut through the noise of the world, both external and internal, and concentrate solely on the task at hand. This inner stillness allowed them to move with purpose and precision, to fight with the focus of a monk in deep meditation. But silence also had a more practical application. The discipline instilled in knights by their monastic-inspired training helped them withstand the harsh realities of battle. Monks were trained to endure long periods of solitude and deprivation, developing mental fortitude. Knights, similarly, were trained to endure physical and emotional hardship. Silence became a way for them to center themselves, to block out the fear, fatigue, and pain that inevitably came with combat. A knight who could remain silent in the face of danger had already won half the battle. It's fascinating how these two worlds, monastic life and knightly combat, came to intersect in such an unexpected way. Knights, who were warriors by profession, often found themselves turning to the quiet practices of monks to strengthen their resolve. In a world full of noise and violence, silence became a sacred art, a practice of both spiritual and practical importance. And perhaps that's why knights, with all their armor and weapons, always carried a quiet strength with them, one that didn't rely on sound, but on the discipline of their minds and bodies. You stand in the quiet shadows, your breath slow and steady, each movement measured and deliberate. This silence Juve learned to embrace wasn't just about being physically quiet, it was about mastering the mind. To move silently in battle, a knight needed not only the control of his body, but also the control of his thoughts. It was a delicate balance. The outer stillness mirrored the inner calm that knights had to develop through intense mental discipline. This was the art of focusing inwardly, a skill that took years to perfect. The knights didn't simply train their bodies to move without sound, they trained their minds to remain calm under pressure. The battlefield, filled with chaos and danger, was the ultimate test of a knight's mental fortitude. Historians still debate how much of this mental training was part of the formal knightly education versus individual practice. However, it's clear that knights had to train their minds just as much as their bodies, learning to stay composed amidst the frenzy of war. This mental focus wasn't just a passive skill, it was an active practice of controlling one's thoughts and emotions. The knights were taught to avoid distraction, to remain detached from the fear and adrenaline that often accompanied battle. Silence became a method of clearing the mind, much like a monk in deep meditation. In a sense, the knight's battlefield was not just external, it was internal as well. By silencing his thoughts, the knight could focus entirely on his movements, becoming one with his. This deep mental training was what allowed him to anticipate his opponent's actions before they even occurred, a crucial advantage when facing an enemy. The more a knight practiced this mental discipline, the more attuned he became to his surroundings. Silence became a means of heightening his awareness. Without the noise of panic or distraction clouding his thoughts, he could read the battlefield with a clarity that others could not. Historians still argue whether this mental training was as effective as it was perceived to be. Some believe that it was simply a psychological trick-away for knights to calm their nerves. Others argue that this mental discipline was the true key to their success. Either way, one thing is certain. The silent knight was an expert in more than just physical combat. He was a master of mental composure. This focus, this ability to remain centered amidst chaos, allowed the knight to navigate the battlefield with a sense of calm and control. His mental training, paired with his physical skills, made him an unpredictable force. When others panicked, the knight remained calm, his every action deliberate and precise. It's almost as though the battlefield itself would bend to his will, the chaos transforming into something he could navigate with ease. It's an almost meditative state, one that combined both the mind and the body, allowing the knight to move and strike with impeccable precision. The silent knight, with his disciplined mind and body, became a symbol of strength and control in medieval warfare. His ability to maintain composure in the face of danger set him apart from other warriors. This mental fortitude, honed through years of practice and influenced by monastic traditions, allowed knights to face the brutality of battle with a sense of inner peace. It was this combination of physical prowess and mental discipline that made knights such formidable opponents on the battlefield. As you stand there, absorbing the lessons of silence and mental control, you realize that the true power of a knight lies not in his sword or armor, but in his mind. The ability to remain silent, both physically and mentally, is what separates a true knight from a mere warrior. It's a skill that transcends the battlefield, applicable in all aspects of life where focus and composure are needed. And as you prepare to face your own challenges, you carry with you the wisdom of centuries, the quiet strength of the silent knight. You're now in the thick of the battle, but you don't hear the usual din of war. No clashing swords, no shouts, only your breath and the faint sound of movement beneath your feet. You've mastered the art of silence, but the question remains, how did knights learn to move so quietly? It wasn't just an instinctive skill. They spent countless hours refining their footwork, training in stealth and precision from a very young age. Every step they took had to be calculated, every movement timed perfectly. To the untrained eye, it may seem like a knight was gliding through the battlefield, almost invisible. The footwork, often compared to that of a predator, was designed to make as little noise as possible. A knight had to be as quiet as a shadow, moving with grace and control, careful not to alert the enemy to his presence. Historians still argue whether this silent footwork was instinct or training. Some believe that knights had an innate ability to move quietly, while others suggest that it was entirely the result of their rigorous training. One thing is clear, this technique was central to their ability to fight without giving away their position. The knight's ability to move undetected was a fundamental aspect of their battle strategy. This skill was honed through repetition and discipline. Knights would practice walking on different surfaces: mud, gravel, stone, and even soft grass, learning how to adjust their movements to minimize noise. It wasn't just about being quiet on the battlefield. It was about adapting to any environment and making the least amount of noise possible, regardless of the terrain. This adaptability gave knights the flexibility to operate in various situations, from open fields to dense forests. They were trained to be ready for anything, with their quiet movements becoming second nature. The training wasn't just about moving silently, it was also about controlling the tempo of the battle. A knight who could move without sound could approach his enemy undetected, wait for the perfect moment, and strike with devastating speed. Historians still argue whether knights ever used silence to gain psychological advantages over their opponents. Some believe it was a deliberate tactic to unnerve the enemy, while others think it was simply a result of the knight's deep training. Regardless, the silent knight held a certain mystique: a warrior who could strike from the shadows, without warning, and with lethal precision. As you think about the training that led to this moment, you realize that the knight's silent footwork wasn't just about stealth. It was also about mastery over his own body. To move silently, the knight had to be in complete control of every muscle, every joint. He couldn't afford to let his foot slip or his armor rattle. The slightest mistake could give away his position and ruin his advantage. This level of control over the body required years of discipline, and it was what set knights apart from common soldiers. They didn't just fight, they fought with a level of awareness and control that was nearly unparalleled. You feel the cool air brush past you as you move toward your target, the silence wrapping around you like a cloak. There's no rush, no need for the loud, aggressive battle cries that others might employ. You know what your next move will be, and it's going to be quiet, quick, and deadly. The silent strike wasn't just a rare art, it was a deliberate tactic that knights perfected. But what about the weapons they used? Swords, axes, and spears could be loud and heavy, clashing against shields and armor. For silent combat, knights had to adapt their weaponry to the need for stealth. Historians still debate the exact nature of the weapons knights used for silent fighting, but it's widely believed that knights favored smaller, lighter weapons for this purpose. Daggers, short swords, and even concealed blades were favored for their ability to be wielded swiftly and quietly. These weapons allowed the knights to close the distance quickly, strike without noise, and then retreat just as silently. The knight's weapon was as much an extension of his body as his armor, designed not just for defense but for quiet precision. The design of these weapons was key to their quiet functionality. Unlike the heavy swords used for full-on combat, these silent blades were crafted to reduce any unnecessary noise when drawn or used. They were lighter, more compact, and often crafted with a razor-sharp edge that required less force to make an impact. The silence was not just in the movement of the knight's body, it was also in the weapons they wielded. These blades were purpose-built for stealth, cutting through the air with minimal sound. And in a battlefield, where every sound could betray your position, that subtlety was invaluable. The silent blade was the knight's hidden advantage. While other soldiers might swing heavy swords that could be heard from yards away, the knight's quiet weapon allowed him to strike from the shadows, avoiding detection. This style of combat was ideal for ambushes, surprise attacks, or even reconnaissance missions. The silent knight didn't need to confront his enemies head-on. He could pick them off from the shadows, moving in and out without a trace. The quiet strike was as much about psychology as it was about physicality. The enemy never saw it coming, never had a chance to react, and by the time they realized what had happened, the knight was already gone. Historians still argue whether this style of combat was as effective as it sounds. Some believe that the knight's silent fighting methods were ideal for certain situations, but ultimately not practical in large-scale battles. Others maintain that these techniques allowed knights to outsmart their enemies and give them the upper hand, even in direct combat. But one thing remains clear: the knight's silent strike, whether on the battlefield or in the shadows, was a powerful tool, one that was perfectly aligned with the discipline of silent combat they had spent years perfecting. The art of silent combat wasn't just about physical prowess. It was a mental game as well. Knights had to develop an acute sense of awareness, constantly reading their environment and anticipating potential threats. This heightened state of alertness allowed them to react swiftly and silently, often before their opponents even realized they were in danger. The psychological edge gained from this constant vigilance was immeasurable, giving knights a confidence that bordered on supernatural in the eyes of their enemies. As you continue your silent advance, you can't help but reflect on the years of training that have led to this moment. The countless hours spent perfecting each step, each breath, each subtle movement of your blade. It's not just about being quiet. It's about being invisible, intangible, a ghost on the battlefield. You've become more than just a warrior. You're a silent force of nature, capable of changing the tide of battle without ever being seen or heard. In the end, the true power of the silent knight lies not in their ability to fight, but in their ability to choose when and how to engage. The discipline of silence gives them options that other warriors simply don't have. They can observe, plan, and strike with precision, all while remaining undetected. It's a testament to the knight's training and skill that they can turn silence into such a formidable weapon. As the battle rages on around you, you move with purpose and grace, your every action deliberate and controlled. You are the embodiment of the silent knight, a warrior who has mastered the art of fighting without sound. And as you prepare to strike, you know that your silence will be your greatest ally, your most potent weapon. In this moment, you are not just a knight, you are the very essence of stealth and precision, ready to change the course of history without ever uttering a sound. You're deep in the heart of battle now, but it feels strangely serene. The chaos that surrounds you doesn't affect your movements. You slip between opponents, barely making a sound, your strikes precise and controlled. But it's not just your body and your weapon that keep you silent, it's the environment. The battlefield itself, with all its noise and commotion, plays a key role in the knight's ability to remain unnoticed. But what exactly did knights hear when they fought, and how did it affect their strategy? Historians often focus on the sounds of battle, the clash of swords, the screams of soldiers, the sound of hooves pounding the ground. But what knights heard in the midst of these sounds was just as important as what they did unhear. The battlefield was loud, sure, but it was also filled with subtle, telling noises that a trained knight could pick up on. A knight's ability to listen carefully to the sounds around him could make all the difference in avoiding danger or launching a successful attack. The subtle sounds knights learned to listen for were almost imperceptible to the untrained ear. The sound of an opponent's armor shifting as he adjusted his stance, the faintest rustle of cloth or leather as a soldier readied his weapon. These small noises could give a knight the critical advantage. Historians still argue whether knights' heightened awareness of sound was the result of rigorous training or an innate ability to tune in to their surroundings. Some suggest that knights were simply trained to focus on the quietest sounds, while others believe it was more instinctive, developed over time as they became more attuned to the battlefield. Regardless of how they developed it, knights were able to use these subtle noises to anticipate enemy movements. By listening to the sounds of footsteps, the clatter of swords, or even the shifts in the air around them, knights could predict their opponent's actions. It's a bit like a game of chess. They didn't just react to what was happening. They were listening for clues that would give them insight into the next move. The ability to read these sounds was a skill that set knights apart from other soldiers, allowing them to stay several steps ahead of their enemies. This skill was especially useful when knights were fighting in close quarters. In the midst of a melee, it was easy for the sounds of battle to overwhelm the senses. But a knight who could focus on the faintest of sounds, like the subtle shift of an opponent's weight, or the barely audible movement of a weapon, had the edge. They didn't need to rely on sight or strength alone. Instead, they used their ability to listen, to focus on the details that others missed, to anticipate the movements of their opponents before the clash even began. Historians still debate whether this auditory awareness was truly as common as it is portrayed in the stories of knights. But there is no denying that the battlefield's soundscape played a critical role in their silent combat strategies. By listening for the smallest cues, knights could avoid mistakes, exploit weaknesses, and navigate the chaos of battle with a sense of calm, quiet confidence. The battle rages around you, but you move like water fluid, quiet, undetected. You're not just fighting opponents, you're fighting against the noise. As much as you've learned to move without sound, there's still the psychological element to consider. How does silence affect the mind during combat? A knight's ability to stay composed, to not be rattled by the chaos around him, was just as important as his physical training. Silence wasn't just about avoiding noise, it was a tool to control the battlefield and, more importantly, to control oneself. The mental game of silent fighting was no small feat. The battlefield was overwhelming, a whirlwind of noise, fear, and confusion. But a knight, trained in the art of silent combat, could remain in a state of focus, shutting out the chaos that others couldn't ignore. Historians still argue whether this mental training was as much of an advantage as it seemed. Some believe that knights used their ability to stay calm as a way to manage fear, while others argue it was more about discipline, a way to make every action purposeful, every move intentional. The key to this mental silence was concentration. In battle, distractions were everywhere. The sounds of the enemy, the shouts of comrades, the cries of pain, these things could easily disrupt a knight's focus. But the silent knight knew how to shut all of that out. He focused not on the external noise but on the internal rhythm of his body, the movement of his breath, the placement of his feet. By controlling the noise in his mind, the knight was able to stay calm and make decisions more quickly and effectively than those around him. This focus allowed knights to perform with incredible precision. In the heat of battle, when everything around them seemed to be falling apart, they were able to make calm, measured movements. It was like a form of mental stillness, where the chaos around them faded into the background and their every move was part of a larger strategy. They could strike with surgical precision, their every action calculated and deliberate. And all of this was possible because they had learned to silence their minds and focus entirely on the task at hand. This kind of mental discipline wasn't easy to achieve, but it was what separated the great knights from the average ones. It was said that the best knights had an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. Historians still argue whether this was true, or if it was simply the result of the intense training they underwent. But either way, the ability to control the mind was a powerful tool for a knight. It allowed them to face the chaos of battle without flinching, to make decisions with clarity and confidence, and to remain composed no matter the circumstances. It's clear that silent combat wasn't just about being quiet. Physically, it was about mastering the mind and body in perfect harmony. By remaining calm and focused, the knight could use the chaos of battle to his advantage, turning noise and confusion into opportunities for precision and control. Silence, then, wasn't just a strategy, it was a way of being. The art of silent combat, as practiced by knights, was a complex interplay of physical skill and mental fortitude. It required not just the ability to move without sound, but also the capacity to tune into the subtlest of auditory cues, while maintaining an unwavering focus. This combination of skills allowed knights to navigate the chaotic battlefield with a grace and effectiveness that set them apart from other warriors of their time. The physical aspects of silent combat were honed through years of rigorous training. Knights learned to control every aspect of their movement, from the placement of their feet to the swing of their sword. They practiced moving in full armor without making a sound, a feat that required incredible balance and body awareness. This physical control wasn't just about stealth, it was about efficiency of movement, about conserving energy and striking with precision. But the mental aspects of silent combat were equally, if not more, important. Knights had to develop an almost meditative state of mind, one that allowed them to remain calm and focused in the midst of chaos. They learned to filter out the overwhelming noise of battle and focus on the sounds that mattered: the subtle shift of an opponent's weight, the whisper of a blade being drawn. This heightened awareness, combined with their physical training, allowed knights to react with lightning speed and uncanny precision. The effectiveness of silent combat techniques in real battle situations is a subject of ongoing debate among historians. While some argue that the chaos and confusion of a medieval battlefield would have made such refined techniques impractical, others point to accounts of knights performing seemingly impossible feats of stealth and precision. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, with the most skilled knights able to employ these techniques to great effect, while others relied more on brute strength and numbers. Regardless of their practical application, the principles of silent combat had a profound impact on the culture and mythology surrounding knights. The idea of the silent, deadly warrior became a powerful symbol, representing not just martial skill but also self-control, discipline, and a kind of spiritual purity. This image of the knight as a master of both body and mind continues to captivate our imagination to this day, influencing everything from literature to modern martial arts. In the end, the art of silent combat, as practiced by knights, was more than just a set of techniques. It was a philosophy, a way of approaching conflict that emphasized control, awareness, and precision. Whether on the battlefield or in the quieter conflicts of daily life, these principles continue to hold value, reminding us of the power of silence and the importance of mastering our own minds and bodies. The silent knight moves like a shadow, his every step calculated, his focus razor-sharp. But what about his trusted steed? A knight's relationship with his horse wasn't just a matter of travel or combat, it was about silent communication. A knight's horse had to be trained to move just as quietly, responding to the slightest cues. Together, knight and horse became an inseparable pair, moving with a fluidity that seemed almost otherworldly. The silent connection between them was just another layer of the knight's training. Historians still debate how much of a knight's success in battle was due to the training of his horse, and how much was down to the rider's skill. Some believe that a knight's ability to fight silently was made possible by his horse's training. The horse had to be equally disciplined, trained to move without making a sound, to respond to the faintest shift in the rider's weight or subtle tap of the reins. The relationship between a knight and his steed was built on mutual trust and understanding, a trust that allowed them to move as one, silently and efficiently through the chaos of the battlefield. A horse trained for silent combat was not the typical warhorse you might imagine, one that charges, neighs loudly, and raises dust in its wake. Instead, this horse was taught to move at a steady, quiet pace, to make no noise as it carried its rider into battle. This required a deep level of training and an understanding between horse and rider that was almost telepathic. Knights would spend hours training with their horses, learning to communicate through subtle shifts in weight, pressure on the reins, and even slight shifts in body posture. A knight's horse wasn't just an animal, it was an extension of himself, a partner in the art of silent combat. The knight's control over his horse also meant that he could choose when to engage in battle and when to retreat. In the heat of combat, the silent coordination between knight and steed allowed them to maneuver through enemy lines with precision. The horse, well trained in the art of stealth, would carry the knight to the perfect position without making a sound. This silent partnership allowed the knight to strike when the time was right and vanish just as quickly, leaving his enemies bewildered and confused. Historians still debate whether the silent partnership between knight and horse was more of an art or a necessity. Some argue that the bond was a tactical advantage, while others believe it was simply a matter of the knight's training being so thorough that even his horse had to adapt. Regardless of the reason, one thing is clear: the silent knight and his horse were a formidable duo. Their ability to move in sync, without a sound, gave them an incredible advantage in battle. Their movements were so fluid, so precise, that they seemed to disappear into the landscape, becoming invisible to the enemy. This ability to blend into the environment, to become one with the terrain, was another critical aspect of the knight's silent combat skills. You move seamlessly with your steed, as if the two of you are a single entity, your movements in perfect sync. It's a delicate balance, one that takes years to master, but even as you ride, your thoughts drift to the larger question. Was the silence in which knights trained and fought more than just a method of stealth? Some historians argue that it was a deliberate strategy, a way for knights to control the flow of battle and maintain the upper hand. Others believe that silence, at its core, was a necessity, a survival skill that developed naturally out of the need to stay unnoticed. But what if it was both? Historians continue to debate this point, and the answer isn't as straightforward as we might like. What we know for certain is that silence was a powerful tool, one that knights used to their advantage, whether it was a deliberate choice or not. The question becomes, was silence the product of strategic thinking or an unconscious reaction to the chaotic nature of battle? Some knights may have been trained to use silence as a way to outwit their enemies, while others may have found it to be a natural extension of their training. But regardless of whether silence was strategic or a byproduct of knightly training, one thing is clear: it gave the knights an edge that few could match. Silence allowed them to move in ways that others couldn't, whether it was on foot or on horseback. They could slip through enemy lines, unseen and unheard. They could strike with deadly precision, knowing that their every move would be a calculated, silent one. And they could retreat just as quietly, vanishing into the shadows before their enemies had a chance to react. In this way, silence was not just a skill, it was a weapon in and of itself. The question of whether this silent combat was the result of strategy or necessity is one that will continue to be debated for years to come. Some historians believe that it was a methodical approach to battle, one that knights were taught from an early age. Others argue that it was simply an adaptive response to the chaos of war, a way for knights to maintain control in an unpredictable environment. Whatever the case, silence was undoubtedly an integral part of the knight's combat technique. It was a skill that set them apart from the rest of the soldiers, a silent strength that was not immediately obvious, but was all the more deadly for its subtlety. As you reflect on this, you realize that silence in combat wasn't just a physical technique, it was a mental one as well. The knight who mastered the art of silent combat was able to control his environment, his movements, and his thoughts with a level of precision that most could only dream of. Whether by design or out of necessity, silence was the knight's most powerful weapon, and it was a weapon that would leave its mark on history, quietly but unmistakably. The battlefield quiets once more as you slip between your foes, an unspoken rhythm guiding your every move. The question remains, was this silence a technique exclusive to the knight, or did it ripple through the entire military structure of the Middle Ages? While knights perfected the art of silent combat, it's clear that their training was part of a larger system. The concept of silent combat was unconfined to the knight alone, it extended to his entire approach to warfare. Whether in the planning stages or during the actual fight, silence was woven into the very fabric of medieval military strategy. Historians still argue about the extent to which silence played a role in the military tactics of the time. Some believe that knights were trained with silence in mind to gain the element of surprise, while others claim that silence was merely a result of the knight's extraordinary discipline, developed over years of training. In either case, it's clear that silence wasn't just a personal skill, it was a key part of how knights interacted with their fellow soldiers and approached battle. This integration of silence into military tactics wasn't just about individual knights moving quietly across the battlefield. It also affected how they coordinated with one another. Silent communication through subtle hand signals or prearranged movements allowed groups of knights to move as a unified, almost invisible force. This level of coordination was essential in large-scale battles, where the slightest sound could alert the enemy to your position. In this way, knights had an advantage that allowed them to maneuver in close quarters, strike with precision, and retreat without being seen. Silent communication wasn't just a personal skill, it was a group strategy. But the benefits of this silent approach went beyond the battlefield. The discipline required to maintain silence extended to other aspects of knightly life. Training in silent combat taught knights how to control their emotions, their impulses, and their reactions. This level of self-discipline was invaluable not only in combat, but in their day-to-day lives as well. Silence wasn't just about avoiding sound, it was about mastering oneself. The knight's ability to move without making a sound was a reflection of his ability to control every aspect of his existence, to be precise and deliberate in all things. Historians still debate whether this mental discipline had any impact on the broader social structure of medieval society. Some suggest that the knight's role as a warrior also carried over into his role as a leader, teaching him to be patient, thoughtful, and composed. Others argue that knights were simply soldiers who used these techniques in the context of warfare, and that their daily lives were much louder than their training might suggest. But one thing remains clear: the ability to control one's own body and mind in silence gave knights a unique sense of power, both on and off the battlefield. The battlefield is quieter now. Your breath is even, your movements controlled as you take a moment to reflect on the journey that brought you here, quiet, measured, and precise. The idea of silent combat wasn't just a theoretical skill. It was something knights took with them into every aspect of their lives, including training in the dark. Yes, it's true, much of their silent combat training took place under cover of night, where the lack of visibility made their mastery of silence even more critical. In the dead of night, when visibility was limited, every sound could spell disaster. Knights honed their skills in these conditions to master the art of fighting without the need for sight. Training at night was both a practical and symbolic exercise. The absence of light created an environment where silence could reign supreme. You couldn't rely on your eyes to tell you where the enemy was. You had to rely on your senses, particularly hearing, touch, and balance. Historians still argue whether night training was purely tactical or more philosophical, a way for knights to sharpen their mental focus under pressure. Some believe that night training was simply a matter of practicing stealth in the most difficult conditions, while others suggest it was also about forcing the knights to trust their instincts and internal senses more than their eyes. In any case, it was during these night sessions that knights learned to navigate the battlefield without relying on visual cues. Night training also forced knights to sharpen their skills in using the environment around them. The sounds of their movements, the rustling of leaves, the creak of armor, these noises became their markers. They learned to assess the terrain, the wind, and even the faintest vibrations in the ground to help them understand their surroundings. In the darkness, the knight's heightened awareness became his greatest asset. The quiet was not just an absence of noise, but an opportunity to tune into the most subtle of sounds, the smallest shifts in the atmosphere that could signal an approaching threat. Historians argue whether night training was widespread across all knightly orders, or if it was a specialty of certain groups, like the Templars or Hospitallers. Some believe that it was an essential part of every knight's education, while others suggest that only elite warriors were given this type of rigorous training. Regardless of how it was implemented, night training became a defining feature of the knight's combat style, adding another layer of discipline and stealth to their already impressive arsenal of skills. As you move through the darkness, feeling every step, every breath, you begin to understand the purpose behind this nocturnal training. It was unjust about the physical aspects of silent combat, it was about refining the knight's mental discipline, forcing him to operate in an environment where nothing could be predicted and everything relied on his ability to focus, feel, and react without hesitation. This silent, invisible mode of combat was not just a skill, it was a philosophy, a way of existing in the world, and an ideal to live by. The impact of this training extended far beyond the battlefield. Knights who mastered the art of silent combat found themselves better equipped to handle the challenges of daily life. Their heightened awareness and control over their own bodies and minds gave them an edge in diplomatic situations, allowing them to read the subtle cues and unspoken messages that others might miss. In a world where power often came from brute force, these knights possessed a different kind of strength, one born of patience, observation, and calculated action. As you stand in the quiet aftermath of battle, you realize that the silence you've cultivated is more than just a tactical advantage. It's a testament to the discipline and dedication that defines the knightly order. The ability to move without sound, to communicate without words, to strike without warning, these are the hallmarks of a warrior who has truly mastered his craft. And yet, as you survey the scene around you, you understand that this mastery comes at a cost. The years of training, the countless hours spent honing your skills in the dark, have shaped you into something more than just a soldier. You are a living embodiment of the silent strength that has defined knights for generations. In the end, as you prepare to leave the battlefield behind, you carry with you not just the memory of this victory, but the knowledge that your training has prepared you for whatever challenges lie ahead. The silence that surrounds you is not empty, it's filled with potential, with the promise of future triumphs, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have mastered one of the most demanding and mysterious aspects of knightly combat. As you move forward, your steps are sure, your mind is clear, and the silence that has become your constant companion continues to guide you. A silent guardian in a world of chaos and noise. The quiet of the night lingers, but there's a subtle shift in the air. It's almost as though UVA transcended the battlefield and entered a different realm, one where silence isn't just a technique, but a way of life. This silence that the knights so meticulously trained for wasn't just about combat. It was about achieving a mental state that allowed them to remain calm and deliberate, even in the most extreme circumstances. But how did this mental discipline, honed over years of silent training, affect a knight's state of mind? As the battle rages on, you realize that the ability to fight silently goes far beyond physical control. It's about mastering your mental state, being able to keep your cool in the face of chaos. The knights, through years of silent practice, were able to find peace in the midst of battle. They learned to control their emotions, to suppress fear, anxiety, and even rage, so they could act with clarity and precision. Historians still debate whether this mental discipline was an inherent part of knightly education or something that evolved naturally as knights gained experience in the field. But regardless of its origins, it was clear that the mental aspects of silent combat played just as important a role as the physical. The calm that knights cultivated wasn't just about remaining undistracted. It was about the psychology of silence itself. In a world full of noise, the ability to stay silent physically and mentally was a weapon of its own. It allowed the knight to make decisions more effectively, without the clouding influence of emotion. It was as if silence allowed the knight to tap into a deeper level of focus, a space where everything else faded away, and the only thing that mattered was the next move. This mental silence wasn't just a technique for combat. It extended to every aspect of a knight's life, allowing them to remain calm and composed in the face of any challenge, whether it was a battle, a diplomatic negotiation, or a personal crisis. The knight's ability to stay mentally clear and focused gave him an edge that few could match. This was the real power of silent combatant, just the ability to move unseen or strike without warning. But the mental discipline that underpinned it all. The silence of the knight wasn't merely a physical attribute, it was a mental fortress, a state of being that gave him an extraordinary ability to withstand pressure and perform under the most extreme circumstances. As you pause and reflect on the mental strength it took to master silence, you realize that it wasn't just about blocking out the noise of the world. It was about learning to embrace the quiet. It was about finding peace in chaos, calm in the storm, and clarity in the midst of confusion. The silent knight didn't just fight better because of his physical training. He fought better because his mind was a fortress, impervious to the noise and distractions of the world around him. The battle now feels like a distant echo, a mere backdrop to the peace you've learned to cultivate. It's a strange feeling, moving with such precision and focus, your mind clear, your actions decisive. But what you begin to realize is that this silent control was something knights could simply flip on when they mounted their horses or entered a battlefield. It had to be integrated into their daily lives. To fight silently, to truly harness the power of silence, knights needed to bring this mindset to every aspect of their routine, to every moment of their day. Silence wasn't just for combat, it was a way of being. Historians still argue whether knights were truly silent in their day-to-day lives, or if this was more of a battle strategy. Some suggest that the monastic training influenced the knights' overall demeanor, making them disciplined, stoic, and reflective in their personal lives. Others believe that knights were only silent when the situation demanded it, and that outside of combat, they were as loud and boisterous as anyone else. Regardless of the specifics, it's clear that their training in silence was a core part of their identity. It shaped the way they carried themselves, the way they interacted with others, and how they faced challenges. Knights practiced silence, not only in the midst of battle, but also in the stillness of their training grounds. Early morning drills, often done in quiet solitude, required the knights to focus on their movements, to perfect every step, swing, and strike. These routines, performed in near silence, were essential to their ability to remain composed during battle. By conditioning themselves to operate in silence during their training, knights built a mental resilience that would serve them well when the noise of war engulfed them. This practice wasn't just about avoiding sound, it was about reducing distractions, clearing the mind, and sharpening the focus. It allowed the knight to act decisively, without hesitation, because he had learned to filter out everything else. The mental discipline achieved through silent training gave knights an extraordinary ability to concentrate, something that set them apart from other warriors. While others might have reacted impulsively, driven by emotion or panic, the knight was able to stay composed, making calculated decisions that ensured his success. The idea that silence was integral to a knight's identity extended beyond the battlefield. Silence allowed the knight to think clearly, to plan ahead, and to anticipate not just the moves of his enemies, but also the steps needed to achieve his goals. His ability to remain mentally clear and undistracted made him a strategic genius, able to think 2 or 3 moves ahead, much like a chess player focused entirely on the game. Historians still argue whether this strategic brilliance was a result of the knight's silent training or simply his natural talent. Either way, one thing is clear: silence, in both mind and body, was a tool that knights wielded with exceptional skill. In the end, you realize that the power of silence wasn't just about the ability to avoid noise, it was about the ability to master the mind and the body, to create harmony between them. The silent knight wasn't just a figure of stealth or quiet strength. He was a master of his own consciousness, capable of achieving focus and clarity even in the most chaotic of environments. Silence, in this context, was more than a technique, it was a way of life, a philosophy, and a powerful weapon that allowed knights to rise above the noise of the world. As the silent knight moves through the battlefield, you begin to see that his skills are unlimited to simply avoiding noise. They're about gaining the advantage through control. And this control extends to the most unpredictable part of the battlefield, human nature. The knight's mental discipline and silent training weren't just aimed at mastering their own movements. They were also designed to give them a psychological edge over their opponents. The ability to remain calm and unreactive in the face of danger wasn't just a benefit for the knight, it was a method for disorienting his enemy. Historians still debate the extent to which knights used silence to unnerve their opponents. Some argue that the knight's stoic nature and lack of emotional expression were enough to unsettle even the most seasoned fighters. The calm, composed knight, who moved with precision and silent authority, could easily make his enemies second-guess their actions. The absence of fear, the stillness in the face of chaos, made the knight appear almost otherworldly. To fight silently wasn't just a physical act, it was a psychological strategy to project dominance. The very stillness of the knight created an aura of control. When opponents heard the clash of swords and the shouts of warriors, they were caught up in the chaos, reacting impulsively. But when a knight fought in silence, he appeared to be a force of nature, unaffected by the disorder around him. This composed demeanor had an unsettling effect on those around him, making it hard for opponents to predict his next move. In this way, silence became a weapon, a tool for psychological warfare. The knight, by remaining calm and silent, created an environment where his opponent was unsure, unable to anticipate what would happen next. The silence also had a practical function. When others were reacting to the noise of battle, the knight, with his ability to move and think quietly, was able to control the flow of combat. He could observe his opponent, waiting for the right moment to strike. Silence allowed the knight to study his enemy without making his presence known. This subtle form of combat required incredible patience, and the silent knight understood that timing was everything. In contrast to the loud, chaotic nature of battle, the knight's silent movements made him almost like a phantom man, unseen force in a world full of noise. Historians debate whether knights truly used silence in this way to gain an upper hand in battle, or whether it was simply a result of their training and focus. Regardless, there's little doubt that silence allowed knights to gain a psychological advantage. They could stay calm under pressure, make calculated decisions, and remain undistracted by the overwhelming noise of the battlefield. This mental strength, cultivated through years of silent training, allowed knights to control not only their own actions but the battlefield itself. As you reflect on the knight's ability to use silence to dominate the battlefield, you begin to understand that silence was never just about stealth, it was about presence. The knight who could fight in silence didn't just survive, he thrived in chaos. His calmness, his ability to control his emotions, and his mental focus were all essential parts of his success. Silence, then, wasn't just a tactic. It was an embodiment of mastery, of control over not just the body but the mind, and of the battlefield itself. The world around you seems to slow as you continue to move with the silent precision of a trained knight. Your mind, however, lingers on one final question. What happens when a knight truly masters silence? The answer lies in the pursuit of perfectional level of control, so profound that it transcends mere combat and becomes a way of life. The perfect knight, the one who has completely integrated the practice of silent combat, doesn't just fight in silence. He embodies it. His every action, from the slightest gesture to the most deliberate strike, is a reflection of years of mental and physical training, honed to perfection. Historians still argue whether this level of perfection was attainable for every knight, or if it was reserved only for the elite. Some believe that only the most dedicated knights, those who devoted themselves entirely to their training, could reach this state of flawless silent combat. Others argue that perfection, in the strictest sense, was an ideal rather than a reality, that even the most skilled knights occasionally faltered. But what is clear is that those knights, who came closest to achieving this level of mastery, became legends, warriors who moved with such quiet authority that they became almost mythical figures. The idea of the perfect knight is a concept that goes beyond fighting. It's about an internal balance, a harmony between mind and body that allows a knight to function at the highest level. This harmony is reflected not just in combat, but in the knight's ability to maintain control over his emotions, his thoughts, and his actions. The knight who has achieved this perfection has become more than just a soldier. He has become a symbol of discipline, focus, and control. In many ways, the silent knight's pursuit of perfection mirrors the ideal of the monk, someone who seeks enlightenment and mastery over their own mind and body. The knight, through years of training in silence, reaches a level of mental clarity that allows him to make decisions with uncanny precision. Every move he makes, every strike he delivers, is a calculated part of a greater strategy, one that takes into account not just the physical but the psychological and emotional states of everyone involved. Silence becomes not just a tool of war, but a way to transcend the limitations of the human condition. Historians still debate whether the knights ever truly reached this level of perfection, or if the idea of the perfect knight was a romanticized ideal. Some believe that the stories of silent knights, operating with flawless precision, were simply legends built up over time. Others argue that this ideal of perfection was the goal that all knights strived for, even if it was never fully realized. Either way, it's clear that the concept of perfection played a significant role in the knightly tradition. It was a standard that pushed them to achieve the highest level of control, skill, and focus. As you reflect on the journey of the knight, you realize that perfection in silent combat was never about being flawless. It was about striving for mastery. It was about pushing the limits of human potential, about cultivating the ability to remain calm, controlled, and focused in any situation. Whether or not knights ever fully attained this perfection, the pursuit itself was enough to set them apart, creating a legacy of silent warriors who moved through the world with a sense of quiet, unshakable authority. As you step onto the field, the cool grass beneath your feet feels like 1,000 whispers. It's a silence that resonates with the stories of warriors past, of silent knights whose every move spoke volumes. The air around you seems to hum with their presence, their legacy echoing in the wind. Section 18. This serenity, however, soon gives way to a flurry of activity. Knights clad in polished armor are readying themselves for combat. Their movements, though precise and purposeful, seem jarring in this tranquil setting. But as you watch, you realize that this controlled chaos is far from random. Each knight moves with an intent that borders on poetry, a testament to years of rigorous training and discipline. Their armor, far from being mere metal, becomes a canvas of controlled aggression. Every strike, every parry, is a statement, a silent declaration of strength and skill. It's not merely a display of force, it's a lesson in restraint. In this dance of controlled violence, you witness the essence of the silent knight's combat style. They don't just swing their swords wildly, nor do they rely on brute force. Instead, each movement is deliberate, a calculated response to the actions of others. They are masters of timing, exploiting openings, delivering blows when their opponents are most vulnerable. Their fighting style is not just a means to win battles, it's a test of patience, willpower, and strategy. Here, in the heart of this training ground, you see that the Silent Knight's combat prowess isn't born out of bravado, but from an intense focus. They become one with their weapons, extensions of their will, and with the space around them, reading every nuance, every shift in their opponent's stance. It's a ballet of steel and strategy, where silence is the music that guides their every move. For the Silent Knight, the battlefield isn't just a place of clashing arms and shouts of defiance. It's a realm of silent understanding, where the language of steel speaks volumes. Their combat style is a testament to this philosophy, a blend of controlled aggression and strategic brilliance that redefined the very essence of warfare. Section 19. As you stand in the quiet aftermath of the battle, a calmness washes over you. This serene silence is the final testament to the Silent Knight's discipline. Now, your mind shifts to the legacy of these silent warriors, how their techniques and philosophies lived on long after the clanging of swords faded into history. The art of silent combat didn't end with the Middle Ages. It left behind a blueprint that would inspire countless generations, not just in warfare but in martial arts, strategy, and even modern combat. Historians often debate the long-term influence of knights and their silent combat techniques. Some argue that the mental discipline and control fostered by silent training laid the foundation for many modern martial arts. Practices like kung fu, samurai arts, and even modern tactical training borrow heavily from the silent principles knights adhered to. It's not just about the physical actions, it's about the mindset, the calm in chaos, the ability to remain present, to act with purpose even when the world around you is in turmoil. The knight's silent discipline, honed over centuries, has left an indelible mark on the world. What's as fascinating is that many of the lessons learned by knights in their silent combat training are still applicable today. The mental and physical rigor that went into mastering silent movement can be found in various modern disciplines that require intense concentration, precision, and control. From professional athletes who practice mindfulness to military personnel who train in stealth and psychological warfare, the Silent Knight's influence is felt even now. The core principles of silent combat awareness, focus, and discipline are universal, making this ancient practice more relevant than ever. However, some historians argue that the knight's silent combat methods are often romanticized, reduced to mere legend. They claim that the knight's effectiveness in battle didn't always rely on silence, and that noise, chaos, and brute force were often just as important in medieval combat. Yet, even if the perfect silent knight is a historical ideal, the strategic and psychological benefits of silence are undeniable. Silence, as a tool of warfare, continues to be used in different forms today. Special forces and tactical units often rely on the same principles, moving unseen, acting decisively, and using the quiet of the environment to their advantage. The beauty of the Silent Knight's legacy lies in its adaptability. While knights may have been the first to use silence as a combat tool, the concept has evolved, influenced countless martial traditions, and inspired generations of warriors, both physical and mental. The Silent Knight's legacy is not just one of historical significance, but of timeless relevance, an enduring symbol of mastery, control, and focus. As you reflect on this, you begin to understand that the knight's silence wasn't just a tactical advantage. It was a philosophy, a way of life. It was about mastery over the self, and, by extension, the world around them. The Silent Knight taught us that the quietest actions often have the greatest impact, and the calmest minds often achieve the most. This legacy, forged in the fires of medieval battle, continues to ripple through history, proving that sometimes the most powerful forces are those that are unseen, unheard, and silent. Word count, 786. Section 20. The silence around you deepens as the night grows, the echoes of the battlefield fading into the quiet of the present. You take a moment to think about everything you've learned, the discipline, the precision, and the power of silence. For knights, silence was more than just a way to fight. It was a way of being. As you reflect on their legacy, you begin to see that the knights were not just warriors. They were philosophers, masters of their own minds, bodies, and environment. Their silent combat was a testament to their internal strength, their mastery of focus, and their extraordinary control over the chaos of war. As you breathe deeply and feel the weight of the armor settle once again, it's clear that the Silent Knight's journey is not one that simply ended on the battlefield. The principles they embodied: mental discipline, control over the body, and the mastery of silence became an integral part of their identity, shaping not only how they fought, but how they lived. The silent knight wasn't just trained to survive war, he was trained to transcend it, to remain calm and deliberate in a world that was often anything but. Historians continue to explore how much of this silent tradition lives on today. From modern-day soldiers to martial artists, the silent knight's methods still resonate in disciplines that require both mental and physical mastery. The principle that silence offers the greatest form of power continues to be relevant, whether in the quiet moments before a high-stakes decision or the calculated movements of a professional athlete. It's a mindset, a way of conquering not just the world outside, but the mind within. And while the medieval knights' role in history has evolved, their legacy of silent combat remains timeless. It shows us that true strength is often found in stillness, that the most powerful warriors are those who don't need to shout, to make a scene, or to make noise to be heard. The silent knight teaches us that control, discipline, and focus are the ultimate weapons, capable of overcoming even the most intense and chaotic battles. As the last remnants of the battle fade into memory, and the silence grows deeper still, you realize that the true power of the silent knight was indeed just in his ability to fight, but in his ability to remain silent, poised, and perfect under pressure. It was the quiet strength that carried him through the chaos, the calmness that made him unstoppable. The silent knight's journey may be over, but his legacy of mastery, discipline, and quiet power lives on, echoing through time. Now, as you allow the stillness to envelop you, the final lessons of the silent knight are clear. The greatest warriors are those who can remain calm in the chaos, who can control their actions and emotions, and who, above all, know that silence can be their strongest weapon. Word count: 786.